sort of three big challenges in Britain. The first challenge is to make sure we have secure supplies of energy, because obviously a lot of our power stations are now aging and a lot of them aren't compliant with emission standards. So we have to ensure, and our gas reserves are depleting from the North Sea, so we have to make sure we have security of supply. Second thing we have to do is actually meet the challenges of climate change and ensure that the new power stations of the future are going to be low carbon, and also our customers conserve energy as much as they can through energy efficiency. And the third big challenge is to do that in a way that's affordable in a market where gas prices and oil prices are moving inexorably upwards, particularly with all the issues in the Middle East and the issues, sadly, in Japan. So that's what we call the trilemma in the UK. On top of that, for us as a group, actually one of our big challenges is actually to grow beyond the UK into other liberalised markets, which for us really means North America. Yeah. So when we looked at our business model, and when I arrived 5 years ago, the big problem we had was that actually, as a retailer of gas and electricity, we were buying all that energy commodity off very volatile international exchanges. So we were very exposed to moves in the wholesale price. And we concluded that the only way we could reduce that risk and therefore reduce our earnings volatility and lower our cost of capital would actually be to become more integrated. So 5 years ago, of the energy that we sold in the UK, 80% came from the wholesale market and only 20% came from our own sources of production. Where we are today, only sort of 30% comes from the wholesale market and nearly 70% comes from our own sources of production. So we've done a big shift, which actually makes us also much more competitive, because many of the other companies we're competing against in the retail market have integrated power stations. So, one of the things we concluded very early on was that climate change was happening. We needed to do something about it, and we needed to be ahead of the curve rather than just following on in regulation, and actually help customers manage their carbon footprint, reduce their emissions, and in doing so actually reduce their energy bills. And if we could sort of turn the traditional model on its head of, rather than maximizing the amount of gas and power that we sold, to actually one where we were rewarded for selling energy efficiency advice and services and products to our customers, which are actually higher margin than selling the basic energy commodity, then not only was that going to help our customers reduce their carbon footprint and be a good business, but it was also going to help us acquire new customers, because we have this British Gas Services proposition that many of our competitors don't have. So it's a win for us as a growing source of business, and it's a win for our customers, helping them reduce their bills. You're on a very good point, and we have a product that is renewable, that is electricity sourced from renewable sources, and it costs more, because obviously electricity from renewable sources does cost more. And actually the reality is that at the moment, without an energy efficiency proposition, very few customers, although they support the idea of decarbonising and are concerned about climate change, particularly in the current economic environment, very few customers are prepared to actually pay for it. So you have to add to that proposition the opportunity to actually reduce energy consumption, whether it's through insulation, whether it's through condensing boilers, whether it's through smart meters or some of the other technologies that we're installing. Well, it already has done, in the sense that the wholesale price has gone up. That hasn't yet been reflected in retail prices, but as we buy more and more gas at higher prices, we are going to have to pass that on, as are all the other suppliers. So If you just look at, unfortunately, at what's happened to wholesale prices since the beginning of the year, they've moved up by about 25%. Now, part of that was the Middle East, but part of it also was the tragedy in Japan, because with all the nuclear power stations being closed, in Japan they've had to import a lot more liquefied natural gas, which is liquefied natural gas that would otherwise have come to the UK. So again, the price is moving up. Well, change in successful enterprises, I think, is inevitable and has to be something actually that the organisation embraces. Not change for change's sake, but I think you have to get a culture where actually people are up for change, provided it's well argued, well thought through, and you bring everybody along with you. Now, how do you bring everybody along with you is the big question. Firstly, I think you have to have a management team who are totally unified and totally committed to it. And if you don't have that at the top, then actually the organisation will immediately spot differences of tempo or differences of enthusiasm for change. So you have to work hard on that. Then I think there's an enormous amount of communication that you have to do. Very often, and I see this at Centrica, but I've seen it in other organisations as well, actually you can change the front line and you can change the top of the organisation. It's the middle of the organisation that actually takes the longest, because that's often an area where potentially, particularly if change involves some form of delayering or restructuring, where obviously people feel the most threatened. And that's the area where you have to put a lot of effort into ensuring that everybody understands it and really sees personal benefit in it. I think the UK economy, obviously, where we're struggling with high levels of unemployment, undoubtedly from an energy company perspective, one of our greatest concerns is around the lack of STEM skills of science, technology, engineering, and maths, which I think is something actually that is starting to correct, and you're now starting to see more school leavers becoming maths graduates in particular, but also some of the other hard sciences, and I think that's positive. But I think certainly there's more work to do there, and certainly if you look at our sort of European counterparts, I think we are behind. And when we think about the skills that we'll need for the green technologies of the future, or the skills we'll need hopefully for the nuclear renaissance, we do desperately need those skills. Not all of them at university level. We have a big program of apprenticeships through our British Gas academies, and actually I think those can fulfil a very valuable role too in providing employment and really worthwhile jobs for those who don't want to go to university. Well, it's interesting because I've worked for very different styles of leaders over the years. Some very consensual, some very autocratic, and I think both can work, provided they bring people with them and they respect people. I think you have to have, and actually there's a phrase that is used at sort of HSBC where I'm involved, which is called courageous integrity, which is all about being prepared to stand up for what you believe in, being prepared to be persistent, because certain things will go in and out of fashion, and certain stakeholders will be pulling harder than others at different times, and you have to sort of stay the distance and be seen to do that. I personally think you also have to spend a lot of time really making sure you connect with the front line too. I'm not a sort of hierarchical leader who believes in everything sort of cascaded down. I think you have to have regular town hall meetings, and you have to have lots of Q&A, and you have to have regular blogs and weekly communication. Otherwise, actually, in a fast-moving world, you'll find that actually you may be leading from behind rather than leading from in front. So I think one of the interesting things is that as people work their way up through an organization, they often underestimate the amount of time that a chief executive spends on focusing on the external stakeholders. You know, in organizations where you have a chief operating officer, we don't have one at Centrica, but in some organizations, you know, they really focus on running the business. But actually, a lot of my time as a chief executive is on not just running the current business, but actually it's developing new business. But it's also, of course, working with the stakeholders who may be shareholders, the regulator, politicians who will be framing the carbon debate going forward, or the debate around vulnerable customers or new nuclear or whatever it is. So I think people frequently underestimate, you know, the amount of time that has to be spent on not just the sort of obvious day job of making sure the people, processes, technology and systems are there in running the business, but all the other external interfaces that you have to do successfully, particularly if it's a relatively high-profile company like Centrica. Actually, my chairman described this very simply to me when I joined Centrica. He said, actually, you know, we can have a piece of paper about this, but actually it's very simple. The chairman runs the board and the chief executive runs the company. And I think if you stick to that principle, it works very well. And, you know, I'm very fortunate in that I have an incredibly capable, talented chairman who's also very decisive and very experienced chairman, and therefore, you know, I have huge respect for him. And, you know, and I think, you know, we work well together. But I've seen models in North America where actually, you know, the chairman is also the chief executive. That can work even in very large companies, although I think it's increasingly out of fashion, and it's certainly out of fashion in this country. And I think it does actually miss a vital check and balance in corporate governance, which I think needs to be there. So it's not a route that I would recommend going down. I think it's very, you know, everybody's experience is different, but I think to a budding entrepreneur, it is to be incredibly focused. I think when you're starting a business, there are huge temptations to sort of look at everything, whether it's to try new products or try new markets, which often means that actually you end up getting distracted and adding costs before you've added revenue. And also and then you have to be incredibly persistent. The only other piece of advice I would give is just always watch the competition. If you don't have you know, an eye out for what the competition is up to, they will surprise you, and the surprises aren't good surprises.